The mop stopped moving. The mess hall went silent. And one word changed everything. "Storm." That's all he said. One word. But the way the senior Marines reacted, you'd have thought a ghost had just walked through the room. What happened next has been shared millions of times. And by the end of this story, you'll understand why some men don't need uniforms to command respect. Type honour in the comments if you believe service doesn't end when you hang up the uniform. The mess hall at Marine Corps Base Quantico was always loudest at 11:30. That's when the recruits finished their morning training rotation and descended on the chow line like locusts. 200 young men and women, testosterone and adrenaline still pumping, voices competing to be heard over the clatter of trays and the scrape of chairs. It was a Thursday in early November. Cold outside, warm inside. The smell of industrial coffee mixed with whatever mystery meat was being served that day. Standard military fare. Nothing special about the food, nothing special about the day. At least that's what everyone thought. In the far corner of the mess hall, away from the chaos, an old man pushed a mop across the linoleum floor. Methodical, unhurried. The same path he'd traced every day for the past 7 years. Table to table, corner to corner, invisible to most of the people eating around him. His name was Walter Briggs. 71 years old. Grey hair cropped short, though it had thinned considerably over the decades. Deep lines carved into a face that had seen more than most. Hands that were spotted with age but still strong, still capable. He wore the standard janitorial uniform, dark blue pants, light blue shirt with his name stitched above the pocket, comfortable shoes worn soft from miles of walking these same floors. Most people never looked twice at him. He was part of the furniture, background noise. The old janitor who showed up before dawn and left after dinner, who never complained, never caused problems, never asked for anything except to be left alone with his work. But if you watched him closely, and almost no one did, you might notice certain things. The way he carried himself, spine straight despite his years, shoulders squared, a bearing that didn't quite fit a man who pushed a mop for a living. The way his eyes swept the room, not randomly, systematically, cataloguing exits, noting faces. A constant low-level assessment that had become so habitual he probably didn't even realize he was doing it anymore. The way he moved, economical, precise, no wasted motion. Like every action had been trained into him until it became automatic, and if you looked very carefully at his left forearm, below the rolled-up sleeve of his work shirt, you might see the edge of a tattoo, faded with time, an eagle, globe, and anchor, the mark of the Marine Corps. But nobody looked that carefully. Nobody ever did. Until today. The group that would change everything walked in at 11:45. 6 recruits, fresh from officer candidate school, still wearing the swagger of men who thought they'd already proven themselves. They hadn't deployed yet, hadn't seen combat, but they'd survived OCS, and in their minds that made them warriors. Their leader, at least the one who acted like the leader, was a second lieutenant named Kyle Dawson, 24 years old, tall, athletic. The kind of good-looking that had probably gotten him everything he'd ever wanted in life. Wealthy family, Ivy League education. The military was his path to politics, everyone knew. A few years of service to pad the resume, then on to bigger things. He wasn't a bad officer, technically. Scored high on all his evaluations. But there was something about him, a casual arrogance, a sense that the rules applied to everyone except him. The kind of attitude that experienced Marines recognized immediately and learned to avoid. Dawson grabbed his tray and led his group to a table near the corner, near where Walter Briggs was finishing up his mopping. They didn't notice him at first, too busy laughing at some joke, too focused on their own conversation. But as they sat down, Dawson's foot caught the edge of the mop bucket, sending dirty water sloshing across the floor. "Watch it," Dawson said, not even looking up. Walter said nothing, just repositioned the bucket and continued his work. "You hear me, old man?" I said, "Watch it." Walter looked up. His eyes met Dawson's for a brief moment. Something flickered there. Something the young lieutenant was too inexperienced to recognize. Then Walter looked away and kept mopping. One of the other recruits, a lieutenant named Foster, nudged Dawson. "Let it go, Kyle. He's just doing his job. His job is to stay out of my way." Dawson was louder now. The nearest tables had started to notice. "Hey, janitor, I'm talking to you." Walter stopped mopping. He stood still, both hands resting on the mop handle, and waited. "That's better." Dawson smiled. The smile of someone who enjoyed having power over others. "You know, you missed a spot over there, by that table. You see it? I'll get to it. You'll get to it when I tell you to get to it. That's how this works, you understand?" The mess hall had gotten quieter. More people were watching now. Some uncomfortable, some amused. A few of the older enlisted men near the back had stopped eating entirely, their expressions unreadable. Walter's jaw tightened. That small tell that only someone watching very closely would notice. But his voice remained calm. "I understand, sir." The word sir seemed to encourage Dawson. He leaned back in his chair, playing to his audience now. "Hey guys, check this out. We've got ourselves a military groupie," he gestured toward Walter. "You know what that is, old-timer? Civilians who hang around bases pretending they're part of something. Probably tells everyone at the VFW he was a war hero." Laughter from Dawson's table. Nervous silence from the tables around them. "Actually," Walter said quietly, "I served." "Sure you did." Dawson's voice dripped with contempt. "Let me guess. Reserves? National Guard? What did you do? Drive a supply truck for a couple of years?" "Something like that." "Yeah, I figured. The real warriors don't end up pushing mops, do they?" Dawson looked around at his friends, making sure they appreciated his wit. "They end up commanding men, leading missions, making history, not cleaning up other people's messes." Walter said nothing. He had begun mopping again, slow and steady, as if Dawson wasn't even there. This seemed to irritate the young lieutenant more than any response could have. "Hey, I'm not done talking to you." Dawson stood up. He was taller than Walter, younger, stronger. Everything about his posture said he knew it. "Look at me when I'm speaking." Walter stopped again, looked up. Those pale eyes meeting Dawson's, holding steady, no fear in them, no anger either. Just a kind of patient stillness that Dawson found oddly unsettling. "What do you want?" Walter asked. "I want you to show some respect." "I've shown you nothing but respect, Lieutenant." "Then why do I feel like you're looking at me like I'm something you scraped off your shoe?" The question hung in the air. More people were watching now. The mess hall had gone from noisy to nearly silent, conversations dying one by one as attention shifted to the corner. "Maybe," Walter said slowly, "because you're treating me like something you scraped off your shoe. And in my experience, people who do that usually don't like having it reflected back at them." Dawson's face flushed. His friends exchanged glances. One of them, a lieutenant named Torres, put a hand on Dawson's arm. "Kyle, come on, let's just eat." "No." Dawson shook off the hand. "No, I want to understand something here. I want to understand why a janitor, a civilian janitor, thinks he can talk to a Marine officer like that." "I didn't mean any disrespect, sir." "Bull!" Dawson stepped closer. "You know what I think? I think you resent us. I think you spent your whole pathetic life wishing you could be what we are, and now you push a mop in a military mess hall because it's as close as you'll ever get. Am I right?" Walter was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was still calm, still quiet, but there was something underneath it now. Something that made Torres take a step back. "You don't know anything about me, Lieutenant." "I know everything I need to know. I know you're old. I know you're a janitor, and I know that in the hierarchy of this base, you're about as important as the dirt you're sweeping up." "Kyle," Foster's voice was tight, "that's enough. It's enough when I say it's enough." Dawson was fully committed now, the kind of committed that came from pride and embarrassment, and the need to save face in front of his peers. "You know what, old man? Let me educate you on something, since you're so interested in military culture." He leaned against the table, arms crossed, playing professor. "Do you know what a call sign is?" Walter's mopping stopped again. His hand tightened on the mop handle, just slightly. "A call sign," Dawson continued, "is a name given to someone who's earned it. Pilots get them, special operators get them. Real warriors with real accomplishments. It's a mark of honor, of respect, of belonging to something bigger than yourself. Do you understand what I'm saying?" "I understand." "Good. So you understand that call signs aren't for janitors. They're not for people who clean toilets and mop floors. They're for people who matter, people who do things that make a difference in this world." Dawson paused, clearly pleased with his speech. His friends were nodding along, though a few of them looked increasingly uncomfortable. "So tell me, Janitor, do you even know what a call sign is? Really know? Have you ever had one? Has anyone ever looked at you and said, There goes someone worth naming, someone worth remembering. The mess hall was completely silent now, 200 people holding their breath, waiting. Walter Briggs set his mop against the bucket. He straightened up slowly. When he spoke, his voice was no louder than it had been, but somehow it carried to every corner of the room. Storm. One word. The recruits at Dawson's table looked confused. Storm? What did that mean? Was the old man having some kind of episode? But across the mess hall, something very different was happening. At the table near the entrance, a gunnery sergeant named Marcus Webb dropped his fork. It clattered against his tray, unnaturally loud in the silence. His face had gone pale. 3 tables away, a master sergeant named Rodriguez stopped mid-chew, his eyes wide, staring at the old janitor like he was seeing him for the first time. In the kitchen doorway, a staff sergeant who had come out to investigate the commotion grabbed the doorframe for support, his knees suddenly weak. And in the far corner, a colonel who had been eating lunch alone, a man named Patterson who had been with Marsoc for 23 years, rose slowly from his seat. His tray was forgotten. His food was forgotten. Everything was forgotten except the old man standing in the middle of the room with a mop in his hand. "Oh my God," the colonel said softly. Then louder, "Everyone on your feet, now." The command cut through the confusion. Chairs scraped back. Marines stood, some still chewing, all looking bewildered. "What the hell is going on?" Dawson demanded. "Colonel Patterson, Shut your mouth, Lieutenant!" Patterson's voice was like a whip crack. "Shut it and listen." The colonel walked forward, every step deliberate, every eye in the room tracking him. He stopped in front of Walter Briggs, and then Colonel David Patterson, 23 years in Marine Special Operations, 4 combat deployments, 2 Bronze Stars, one of the most decorated officers on the base, did something that made every recruit in that mess hall question everything they thought they knew. He stood at attention, ramrod straight, eyes forward, and he saluted the janitor. "Master Gunnery Sergeant Walter Briggs. Call sign Storm." The colonel's voice was thick. "Sir, it's an honour." Walter returned the salute, slowly, his arm trembling slightly with age or emotion or both. "At ease, Colonel. There's no need for all this." "With respect, sir, there's every need." Dawson's face had gone from red to white. I don't understand. What's happening?" Colonel Patterson turned to face him, and the look in his eyes made Dawson take an involuntary step backward. "You want to know about call signs, Lieutenant? You want to educate people about what it means to earn one?" Patterson's voice was quiet, but it carried like thunder. "Let me educate you." He gestured toward Walter. "Storm. That's what they called him. Not because he was loud, not because he was flashy, but because when he came, everything changed. Everything." Patterson began to pace. The mess hall was absolutely silent. Not a cough, not a whisper. Just the colonel's voice and the weight of history settling over the room. December 14th, 1992. Mogadishu, Somalia. A 12-man force recon team was conducting a night extraction of a high-value target when they walked into an ambush. RPGs took out their vehicles in the first 10 seconds. They were pinned down in a building with no communications, no support, and approximately 80 hostile combatants surrounding their position. Patterson paused. Master Gunnery Sergeant Walter Briggs was not part of that team. He was 3 kilometers away, monitoring radio traffic from a support position. When the shooting started, his commanding officer ordered him to hold position. Standard protocol. The extraction team was considered lost. The colonel's voice dropped lower. Storm didn't hold position. He disobeyed direct orders, commandeered a vehicle, and drove straight into the hottest combat zone in the city. Alone. Gasps. Murmurs. Dawson's face was ashen. What happened next is still classified. Most of it always will be. But I'll tell you what I can, because every Marine in this room needs to understand who they've been eating lunch next to for the past 7 years. Patterson stepped closer to Walter, who stood motionless, his face carefully neutral. Briggs engaged the enemy position alone, drawing fire away from the trapped team. He killed 17 combatants in the first 4 minutes. 17 confirmed. Then he breached the building where our Marines were pinned down, evacuated 3 wounded men under fire, and held a defensive position for 6 hours until air support could arrive. The colonel's voice cracked. 6 hours, alone, with 3 wounded Marines behind him and an army trying to get through. When the helicopters finally came, they found him with 11 rounds left. 11. He'd been shot twice, shrapnel in his leg, and he was still firing, still holding, still refusing to let anyone past. Patterson turned to face the room. All 12 members of that extraction team survived. You know what they call December 14th now in special operations circles? Storm's Night. Because one man changed everything, one man refused to accept that his brothers were going to die. He looked at Dawson, and his voice went cold. And you asked him if he knows what a call sign is. The silence that followed was devastating. Dawson looked like he might collapse. His friends had distanced themselves from him, their expressions a mixture of horror and shame. But Patterson wasn't finished. That's not even the half of it, Lieutenant. You want to know more? You want to know why every senior Marine on this base knows the name Storm? He didn't wait for an answer. March of '98. Kosovo. A humanitarian convoy carrying 43 refugees was ambushed by Serbian paramilitaries. Briggs was serving as an advisor to NATO forces. Officially, he was there in a non-combat role. Officially, he was supposed to let local forces handle it. Patterson shook his head. Storm doesn't know the meaning of officially. He broke cover, engaged the attackers, and held them off long enough for the convoy to escape. In the process, he took a round that collapsed his left lung. He drove himself to a field hospital 17 miles away, walked in under his own power, and asked if anyone had a cigarette before he collapsed. Quiet laughter, mixed with something like awe, rippled through the room. 2003, Iraq. The first push to Baghdad. A supply column got separated from its escort, wandered into an ambush. By the time anyone realized what had happened, they were surrounded. 16 soldiers and Marines, most of them non-combat personnel, cooks, mechanics, clerks, people who never expected to see the enemy face to face. Patterson's voice softened. Briggs was 58 years old. He'd already retired once. He'd come back as a contractor, running logistics support. He wasn't supposed to be anywhere near combat. But when he heard what was happening on the radio, he grabbed a weapon, commandeered a Humvee, and drove 15 miles through enemy-controlled territory to reach them. The colonel looked at Walter, something like reverence in his eyes. He organized their defense, turned a scattered group of terrified support personnel into a fighting force, held that position for 4 hours against repeated assaults. When relief finally arrived, they found him teaching a 19-year-old cook how to clear a jam from an M240. The kid was crying. Briggs was telling him knock-knock jokes to keep him calm. Patterson turned back to the room. That kid's name was James Patterson. He's a lieutenant colonel now, stationed in Okinawa. He calls Briggs every year on the anniversary, calls him Dad, because that's what Storm became to him. That's what Storm became to a lot of people. The colonel was in front of Dawson now, close enough that the young lieutenant could see the veins standing out in his neck. You want to know why a man with that record, a man with a silver star, 2 bronze stars, 3 purple hearts, and enough commendations to paper a wall, why he pushes a mop in a mess hall? Patterson's voice broke. Because he can't leave. Because this is his family. Because after 40 years of serving his country, the only thing he wanted in retirement was to stay close to the people he loves. The Marine Corps, his brothers and sisters, the young men and women he sees walking through this chow line every day, who remind him of the ones he saved and the ones he lost. The colonel wiped his eyes. Didn't try to hide it. He took this job 7 years ago because they wouldn't let him train recruits anymore. Said he was too old, liability issues. So he found another way. Found a way to stay. To be near the sound of Marines, the smell of the mess hall, the feeling of being part of something bigger than himself. Patterson stepped back. His voice had steadied now, gone hard again. And you stood there and mocked him. You called him a groupie. You questioned whether he'd ever done anything that mattered. Dawson was shaking. Actually shaking. Sir, you didn't know. I understand that, Lieutenant. Nobody told you who he was. Nobody told you because he didn't want anyone to know. He asked us. Asked the base commander personally, not to make a fuss. Said he just wanted to do his job. Wanted to be treated like everyone else. Patterson laughed bitterly. But here's the thing about respect, Lieutenant. It shouldn't depend on knowing someone's resume. It shouldn't require medals or commendations or a Wikipedia page. It should be the default, the baseline, the bare minimum we offer to every human being who crosses our path. He looked around the room. You want to be an officer? You want to lead Marines into combat? Then learn this lesson right now, today, in this mess hall. Every person you meet deserves dignity until they prove otherwise, not the other way around. The moment you start deciding who's worthy of respect based on their appearance, their job, their age, You've already failed, as an officer, as a Marine, as a human being." Dawson's knees seemed to give out. He sank into his chair, his head in his hands. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." Walter Briggs, who had stood silent through the entire revelation, finally moved. He walked over to Dawson's table, slowly, every eye in the room tracking him. He pulled out the chair across from Dawson and sat down. "Look at me, son." Dawson raised his head. His eyes were red. "I've been where you are," Walter said. His voice was gentle now, grandfatherly. "Young, cocky. Thought I knew everything about everything. Thought I could tell a person's worth in 30 seconds. He leaned forward. "I was wrong, every time, without exception. The most dangerous man I ever knew looked like a librarian. The bravest Marine I ever served with stuttered when he talked. And the best leader I ever followed, the man who taught me everything I know about courage, was 5'4" and had a voice like a church mouse." Walter reached out and put a weathered hand on Dawson's forearm. "You made a mistake today, a bad one, but it doesn't have to define you. What defines you is what you do next. Do you learn from it? Do you grow? Do you become the kind of officer who sees every person, every single person, as someone worth respecting? Or do you let this moment harden you, make you defensive, make you blame everyone except yourself?" Dawson's voice was barely audible. "How do I fix this?" "You don't fix it. You can't unring a bell. What you do is carry it. Let it make you better. Every time you're tempted to judge someone by what you see on the surface, remember this day. Remember how wrong you were. Let that memory be a gift." Walter stood up. He picked up his mop from where it had been leaning against the bucket. "And one more thing, Lieutenant. The men I saved, the things I did, they don't belong to me. They belong to everyone I served with. Every cook who fed us, every mechanic who kept our vehicles running, every clerk who processed our paperwork so we could focus on the mission. There's no such thing as a small job in the Corps. Every role matters, including this one." He gestured with the mop. "I'm not pushing a mop because I couldn't do anything else. I'm pushing it because it needs to be done. Because someone has to keep this place clean so you can eat without getting sick. Because service doesn't require a rifle. It just requires showing up, doing your job, and taking pride in the work." Walter Briggs looked around the room. 200 faces staring back at him. Some in awe, some in tears, all of them changed. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a floor to finish." He turned and went back to mopping. Same slow, methodical strokes. Same unhurried patience, as if nothing had happened. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Colonel Patterson cleared his throat. "You heard the man, as you were." Slowly, painfully, the mess hall came back to life. But it was different now. Quieter, more thoughtful. Marines who had never looked twice at the old janitor found themselves watching him with new eyes, nodding when he passed, offering small smiles of acknowledgement. And at the table near the corner, Kyle Dawson sat alone. His friends had drifted away, giving him space. He watched Walter work, watched the careful, precise movements, the straight back, the steady hands. After 20 minutes he stood up, walked over to where Walter was cleaning the last section of floor. "Sergeant Briggs?" Walter looked up. "Just Walter now. Haven't been a sergeant in a long time." "Can I—" Dawson swallowed hard. "Can I help you with the mopping?" Walter studied him for a moment. Then, slowly, he smiled. "There's another mop in the utility closet. Third door on the left." Dawson nodded and walked away. When he came back with the mop, he worked in silence beside the old man. Two figures moving in parallel across the linoleum floor. If you'd walked into the mess hall right then, you might have seen something strange. A young Marine officer, uniform pristine, pushing a mop next to an elderly janitor. Neither speaking, both working. And if you'd looked closely, you might have seen something else. The beginning of understanding. The first step on a long road toward becoming the kind of leader who sees people, not positions. Worth, not appearances. Walter Briggs retired from his janitorial position 2 years later. His health had finally caught up with him. Too many old wounds, too many miles on a body that had given everything it had. The base threw him a party. Attendance was mandatory for all officers. Dawson was there. He was a captain by then, on his second deployment, with a reputation for being the first to learn the names of every support staff member on his base. The first to shake hands with the cooks and mechanics and janitors. the first to remember that every job matters. He gave a speech at the party, short, simple. "This man taught me more in one afternoon than 4 years at Annapolis," he said. "He taught me that real strength doesn't announce itself, that true courage doesn't need recognition, and that every single person we meet is carrying a story we can't see." Dawson looked at Walter, sitting in a chair of honor at the front of the room. "You asked me once what I was going to do with my mistake, whether I was going to learn from it or let it harden me. I hope I've made you proud, sir. I hope I've become someone worthy of the lesson you taught me." Walter smiled, the same gentle smile he'd offered that day in the mess hall. "You have, son, you have." When Walter Briggs passed away, 3 years after that party, his funeral was standing room only. Marines came from every corner of the country, men and women he'd saved, men and women he'd trained, men and women who had simply eaten lunch near him for a few years without knowing who he was, but who remembered the kindness in his eyes and the way he always said good morning. The Marine Corps Honor Guard folded the flag with perfect precision. They handed it to his daughter, a woman in her 50s who had grown up thinking her father was just a quiet man with a complicated past. She knew better now. They all did. Some heroes wear medals on their chests. Others wear blue work shirts with their names stitched above the pocket. The uniform doesn't matter. The rank doesn't matter. What matters is the heart that beats underneath. The choice, made again and again, to serve others instead of yourself. Walter Briggs understood that better than anyone. He lived it every day, in every mop stroke, in every small act of invisible service, and in doing so he taught generations of Marines the most important lesson they would ever learn. Everyone deserves dignity. Everyone has a story, and the moment you forget that, you've already lost something precious, something you may never get back. If this story moved you, wait until you hear about the homeless veteran who was kicked out of his own daughter's graduation ceremony. What happened when the principal discovered who he really was, left the entire auditorium in tears. Subscribe to this channel for more stories of hidden heroes who deserve recognition. Comment honor. If you believe that respect should be given freely, not demanded, and hit that like button if you think every act of service, no matter how small, makes a difference. Because it does. Every single one.